Our first reading today from the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3, about there being a right time or an opportune time for everything and every affair under the heavens, is one of my favorite texts in the Old Testament. As you listen to it, you are carried by the poetry of every line, especially if you are already beginning to grow old and are beginning to feel like you are running out of time. I wonder if you are familiar with that famous singer and songwriter, Jim Croce, who wrote a song entitled Time in a Bottle. Apparently, he composed that famous song in 1971 when he learned that his wife was pregnant. But Jim Croce died in a tragic plane crash in 1973. And his song, which I also call a little piece of poetry, suddenly became a #1 hit on American radio. He must have felt such a profound joy about the news that he was going to become a father. He expressed it so beautifully in that song, Time in a Bottle. And I think the song became a top grosser because he sounded like he was verbalizing a premonition that he would not live long enough to see his child grow into an adult. He probably felt very much like the author of our first reading today. That time was flying away too fast. And how he wished he could freeze time or keep such fleeting moments of joy to eternity. I think what people loved most about Jim Croce was the fact that he strummed his guitar in such a hauntingly beautiful way, suggesting the constant flow of the exciting and the frustrating, the highs and the low points in his life. At some point in the song, he plucks the strings and then he suspends the tune in a tremolo so that the guitar is sounding like it is weeping tears of joy. Sort of asking if it was foolish at all to wish that such moments in his life could last forever. Let us quote from the song. Sabi niya sa kanta, "If I could save time in a bottle, the first thing that I'd like to do is to save every day till eternity passes away, just to spend them with you. If I could make days last forever, if words could make wishes come true, I would save every day like a treasure, and then again, I would spend them with you." Well, Ecclesiastes in our first reading is saying something like this too. And too bad, we tend to think that the poem ends right at that part where he says, there is a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. Well, actually, yung talagang conclusion, the real end of this piece of poetry is in the lines in prose that follow the poetry. And there he says, God has made everything appropriate to its own time, and he has put the timeless into their hearts. He has put the timeless into their hearts. You know, I suggest that you spend time reflecting on this line for the rest of this day. because it is really the point of his poetry. What he wanted to say to his readers is just this: God has put the timeless into our hearts. And this also reminds me of Salvador Dali, that very eccentric artist from Spain, from Catalonia, who puzzled people with his bizarre painting of a clock, a melting clock, a clock melting like butter, in the foreground. And there is also a horse and a mountain in the background. They're also melting. I have a feeling that he is also making a statement about time and about space, about the fluidity of all created reality and the challenge of finding the key to timelessness. If I had the time, to extend this reflection a bit further, I would dwell a little bit more on the gospel, where Jesus seems to be expressing his own premonition that his days were numbered, that his time was up. Instead of running away from the threat of his very limited time, he leaves to his disciples the secret of timelessness. He is not speaking about melting time like Salvador Dali in his paintings, or putting time in a bottle like Jim Croce. Well, instead, he speaks about the readiness to suffer and to die and to rise again. The readiness to give one's life as a ransom for the many. Sabi ni St. Luke, Jesus was praying in solitude when this conversation took place. It was through prayer that he anchored his limited time on earth on that which Ecclesiastes calls the timelessness that God has planted into our hearts. Padre Pio had done the same thing in his lifetime, and he leaped into the timelessness of sainthood. He learned very well from his master, the one whose wounds he carried in his mortal body.